The young man on the other end of the phone cleared his throat, his voice trembling with a nervous academic excitement that I recognized from my years as a librarian. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "We seem to have traced your maternal grandmother's line, and I'm not quite sure how to tell you this, but it appears to connect directly to the deposed royal house of Savoy. Hi, everyone. The channel calls me Grandma Genevieve. My name is Genevieve Dubois, and I am 80 years old. I'm speaking to you from the reading nook of my small cottage in Vermont, surrounded by the books that have been my most faithful companions. This is a story about roots, about the families we are born into, the families we choose, and the ones that choose to forget us. It is a secret that was not mine to keep, but one that was kept from me my entire life, hidden away in dusty church records and forgotten lines of succession. It is a secret my own son and his wife tried to erase, and in doing so, accidentally unearthed in the most spectacular and ironic way imaginable. Even now, they have no idea of the true, full story. To tell this story is to finally claim a history that was almost stolen from me. Before I begin, I would be so grateful if you would please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support, your simple act of bearing witness, helps an old woman feel that her own small branch on the great tree of life is still strong. Thank you, my dears. My story, the one I lived for 80 years, was a simple one, and it was a beautiful one. It began not in a castle, but in the hushed, sacred halls of the university library, where I worked for 45 years. That is where I met my Thomas. He was a history professor, a man with a kind, crinkled smile, and a mind that was as vast and fascinating as the archives he loved to explore. Our love story was written in the margins of borrowed books and whispered over dusty maps. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a wealth of knowledge, of curiosity, and of a deep, quiet, and unshakable love. We bought this little cottage, and we filled it not with things, but with stories. Every wall was lined with bookshelves. We raised our son Richard in this house, surrounded by the ghosts of history and the scent of old paper and my lemon verbena tea. Thomas taught him to read not with picture books, but with the beautifully illustrated maps from old atlases. Our family vacations were not to beaches, but to battlefields and historic homes. We gave our son a deep, profound connection to the past, to the idea that our lives are a continuation of a story that began long before we were born. He was a good boy, a wonderful son. He inherited his father's love of history and my love of order. For 50 years, my life was a quiet, happy, and deeply fulfilling story. Thomas and I had our books, our garden, and our son. It was a complete world. Then 10 years ago, my Thomas passed away, and the quiet in our little cottage became a suffocating silence. The loss of a partner of 50 years is an amputation of the soul. But I endured, as we must. I had my books. I had my garden. And I had Richard. Or so I thought. The real change, the beginning of my erasure, started the day Richard brought Laura home. She was and is a force of nature. She is a marketing executive, a woman who is all sharp angles, bright colors, and loud, confident pronouncements. She doesn't talk. She pitches. She doesn't live. She builds a brand. My quiet, thoughtful, history-loving son was utterly captivated by her energy, by her relentless focus on the future. The first time she came to this cottage, I remember it so clearly. She walked in, her high heels clicking on the old wooden floors, and she looked around at my lifetime of curated books and memories. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too loud for the quiet space. "It's so cozy, like something from a storybook." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a classification. She was placing me and my entire life into a quaint, old-fashioned category, a chapter that was already over. She looked at my wall of books. "Gosh, Genevieve," she said with a bright, tinkling laugh. "Do you ever actually read all of these?" Before I could answer, Richard, my Richard, laughed with her. "Mom's a bit of an analog relic, aren't you, Mom?" he said, and the casual, thoughtless cruelty of it was like a paper cut to the heart. An analog relic. That's what I had become. Laura's project, from the very beginning, was to modernize Richard, to pull him out of his stuffy academic past and launch him into her bright, shiny, forward-facing future. She convinced him to leave his job as a high school history teacher, a job he had loved, and get into corporate consulting, a job that paid more but seemed to deaden his soul. The old atlases on his shelves were replaced by books on synergy and market disruption. The quiet, thoughtful man I had raised began to speak in buzzwords. He became branded. And I, his mother, the living embodiment of the before picture, became a problem for their new brand. My quiet life, my humble cottage, my lack of interest in social media or luxury goods, it was all an embarrassment to them. Their visits became less frequent. The phone calls, once a daily ritual, dwindled to a weekly, then monthly, duty. Then came the project that would be the catalyst for it all, the family tree. It was Laura's idea, of course. It wasn't born from a love of history, but from a love of aesthetics. She had seen a trend on a design blog, enormous, beautifully rendered family trees, framed and hung as statement art pieces in grand entryways. It wasn't about the people on the branches. It was about the look of the thing. It was about legacy. It was about branding the Dubois Scott family. She insisted on hyphenating their names, as a family of historical significance. She announced it to me one Sunday, over a brunch I had painstakingly prepared for them. "We've commissioned a genealogist," she said, her eyes sparkling. "A top-of-the-line firm. We want to trace our roots back as far as possible. The founding fathers, European nobility, who knows what we'll find. It's going to be the centerpiece of our new home." I should have been thrilled, a celebration of our family's history. But then came the quiet, devastating blow. "We've given him all of Dad's family records. And my family's, of course," she continued, not quite looking at me. "We've decided, for the sake of clarity and aesthetics, to focus on the primary Dubois and aesthetics to focus on the primary Dubois and Scott line. To keep it clean. To keep it clean." I felt the air leave my lungs. My line, my entire history, the generations of quiet, hard-working women who had led to me, were being tidied up, erased from the statement art piece for the sake of aesthetics. Where did it go? I was a messy, unnecessary branch that was about to be pruned. "But what about my family?" I asked, my voice a small, tight knot. "The Blanchards? My mother's people?" Richard was the one who answered. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his plate, pushing a piece of melon around with his fork. "Laura and I just thought, it's better to have a direct, strong line. It tells a clearer story. You understand, Mom. It's for the display. For the display. My life. My mother. My grandmother, Dottie. All the women who had come before me. We weren't part of the story they wanted to tell. We didn't fit the brand. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just sat there, in the wreckage of my son's love, and I felt the profound, crushing humiliation of being deliberately, politely, and smilingly erased. They had taken my son, they had taken my history, and they had turned our family's sacred story into a marketing campaign. And they had no idea, not the slightest, faintest clue, that the messy, unnecessary branch they had just pruned was the only one with royal blood in its veins. The weeks that followed that brunch were some of the loneliest of my life. The family tree project became the all-consuming passion of Richard and Laura's life. My son, the man who once spent his weekends happily lost in the archives, was now a man obsessed with a different kind of history. A curated, branded version of his own lineage that had no room for his own mother. Their phone calls, when they came, were no longer about my well-being. They were interrogations. "Mom, do you have any of Dad's old army records? The genealogist is looking for his service dates. Mom, what was the name of Grandpa Dubois' village in France again? The genealogist is trying to trace the parish records." I answered their questions. Of course. I was a librarian. I was a creature of records and of service. I would go through my late husband's old trunks, my hands dusty from the past, and I would find the documents they needed. I was, in a bitter and deeply ironic twist, being asked to help them build the very monument that was designed to exclude me. With every document I handed over, I felt like I was handing over another piece of my own history, allowing it to be shelved away in the dark. They would talk about the project with a breathless, almost feverish excitement. Laura had already commissioned a famous artist to do the final calligraphy on a massive wall-sized piece of parchment. It was going to be framed in antique gold leaf. They spoke of it as if it were a holy relic. "The genealogist is a genius, Genevieve," Laura would gush over the phone. "He's already traced my family back to a sinner of the Magna Carta. Can you believe it? It's just so significant." Significant. It was a word she used a lot. Her family was significant. My late husband's family was significant. My own family, the Blancards, the line of quiet, hard-working farmers and librarians from rural Vermont, were, by implication, insignificant. A footnote they had chosen to delete. The hurt of it was a dull, constant ache in my chest. It was the quiet humiliation of being deemed ordinary, of being told that my story, the story of the woman who had loved and raised her son, was not interesting enough, not grand enough, to be included in the official narrative of his life. I tried once to gently protest. "Richard," I said to my son one afternoon, my voice soft. "I was thinking, my grandmother was a fascinating woman. She came over from Italy as a little girl. Her stories were incredible. Wouldn't that be a wonderful story to include?" He sighed, that weary, impatient sigh that had become so familiar to me. "Mom, we've been over this. The visual, it gets too complicated, too cluttered." Laura has a very specific vision for the aesthetic. We're focusing on the Dubois line. It's cleaner. Cleaner. My grandmother, with her calloused hands and her beautiful broken English, was messy. The past wasn't about truth anymore. It was about aesthetics. It was about creating a clean, marketable brand for their family. So I stopped trying. I retreated into the quiet comfort of my books and my garden. I let them build their beautiful, edited version of the past without me. I became a silent archivist of my own, erased history. "Dubois? Genevieve Dubois?" he asked, as if he were surprised to find me alive. "My name is Peter Abernathy. I'm the researcher your son and daughter-in-law hired. I hope I'm not disturbing you." I was taken aback. I had assumed he would have been instructed not to contact me, the irrelevant branch of the family. "No, not at all, Mr. Abernathy," I said. "It's just—" He hesitated. "I've hit a small snag with your late husband's line. A parish record from his ancestral village in France seems to be missing. Your son mentioned you might have a copy of your husband's family Bible. Sometimes the old Bibles have detailed family records written in the front." "Yes," I said. "Yes, I do." He came to the cottage the next day. He was a young man, probably not even 30, with a shock of unruly brown hair, glasses that were constantly slipping down his nose, and a tweed jacket that looked a little too warm for the season. He was, I could tell immediately, a true scholar. His eyes lit up when he saw my bookshelves. He smelled of old paper and obsessive dedication. He reminded me so much of my Thomas. I gave him the Dubois family Bible, a huge leather-bound tome that had sat on our mantelpiece for 50 years. And as he sat at my kitchen table, carefully turning its fragile, yellowed pages with gloved hands, we began to talk. He wasn't like Richard and Laura. He wasn't interested in the significant names. He was interested in the stories. He asked me about my husband, about our life together, about the history of the house. He was a man who understood that history is not just a collection of names and dates. It's the texture of a life lived. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. He found the information he needed, a birth date that had been smudged in the official record. He was packing up his briefcase, about to leave, when he paused and looked at me, a thoughtful, almost shy look on his face. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, "your daughter-in-law was very specific that I was only to research the paternal Dubois line. But I couldn't help but notice, on your marriage certificate, your maiden name was Blanchard, and your mother's maiden name was Orsini. He said the name with the careful, precise accent of a true historian. That's an old Italian name. A very old name. I just smiled a sad, weary smile. Yes, but we're not a very significant family, Mr. Abernathy. Just farmers and librarians from Vermont. He looked at me, and a flicker of something, professional curiosity perhaps, or just the ingrained refusal of a true scholar to leave a stone unturned, flashed in his eyes. There's no such thing as an insignificant family, Mrs. Dubois, he said softly. Every family has a story. Would you mind if I just took a quick look? Just for my own curiosity. Off the clock, of course. And because he reminded me so much of my Thomas, because his genuine curiosity was a balm to my wounded soul, I said yes. I gave him the only things I had, a small, tattered box of my mother's old photographs and my grandmother's birth certificate from a small village in the Piedmont region of Italy. It wasn't much. It was the messy, insignificant branch of the family tree. I didn't hear from him for over a month. Richard and Laura's project was nearing its completion. The gigantic calligraphed parchment had been delivered to their home. They were having it framed. They were planning a party, an unveiling of the family tree, a celebration of their own curated significance. I was, of course, invited to the party, but not to be a part of the tree itself. I was to be a guest at the celebration of my own erasure. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was Mr. Abernathy, and his voice was different. The calm, academic tone was gone, replaced by a trembling, breathless excitement that I couldn't decipher. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers, the frantic clicking of a keyboard. "Genevieve, I have been in the archives. I have been cross-referencing shipping manifests from Ellis Island, parish records from Turin, and the official Almanac de Gotha. I thought it was a dead end. I thought it was a coincidence of names. Mr. Abernathy, what is it?" I asked, a strange, fluttering feeling in my own chest. He took a deep breath. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper. "The reason your grandmother's family came to America from Piedmont in 1898, they weren't just poor farmers. They were political refugees. They were fleeing the consolidation of the Italian state." And then he said the words that made the teacup rattle in my hand, the words that made the quiet, comfortable story of my entire life dissolve into a fairy tale. "Your grandmother, Sophia Orsini," he said, his voice trembling. "She wasn't just Sophia Orsini. Her full name, her birth name, was Princess Sophia Adelaide Orsini de Savoia." He paused, letting the impossible weight of the name settle in the quiet of my little cottage. "You are, as far as my research can determine, the last living direct descendant of a cadet branch of the Italian royal family." I sat there in my quiet little cottage, the rain tapping against the window pane, and I felt the last 80 years of my life rearrange themselves around the impossible axis of that single word. Princess Tari. It didn't feel real. It felt like a story from one of my books. The Blanchards, the Orsines, my quiet, hard-working, insignificant family. We weren't a messy branch. We were a hidden one. A royal branch, grafted onto the humble rootstock of New England farmers. Mr. Abernathy, in his gentle, scholarly way, explained everything. He told me about the political upheaval in late 19th century Italy. He told me about my great-grandfather, a minor prince who had backed the losing side in a political dispute and had been forced to flee with his family, escaping to America with a handful of jewels and a new anonymous name. They had hidden their past so completely, so successfully, that within a generation, the story was lost. The princess became a farmer's wife. The royal bloodline thinned out into the quiet, steady stream of ordinary American life. Until now. Until me. "And there's more," he said, his voice hesitant. "This branch of the family, they were believed to have been lost, wiped out. As such, certain dormant assets, family properties, and accounts that were held in trust in Switzerland have been sitting untouched for over a century." He cleared his throat. The Swiss bank that holds the trust has been searching for a legitimate heir for decades. Genevieve, the fortune is, it is, by any modern definition, astronomical. I hung up the phone. The rain had stopped. A sliver of sunlight was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of my quiet, book-lined living room. I looked at my hands, my wrinkled, age-spotted hands that had spent a lifetime turning pages and tending to my garden. And I laughed. It was a soft, quiet, and utterly joyous laugh. The laugh of a woman who had just been handed the punchline to the longest and most elaborate joke in human history. My son and his wife had spent a fortune to prove their own significance, to manufacture a connection to a minor sinner of the Magna Carta. And in their arrogant, snobbish quest, they had completely ignored the one person in the room who was, without any effort at all, the real thing. The party, the unveiling of their magnificent family tree, was that Saturday. I had, of course, been planning on quietly declining the invitation. But now I wouldn't miss it for the world. I didn't buy a new dress. I wore my simple, elegant navy blue silk dress, the one I had worn to my husband's memorial service. I wore my mother's simple pearl earrings. I was not going to play their game. I was not going to dress up as a character in their branded production. I was just going to be myself. Genevieve Blanchard Dubois, the librarian, the widow, d'Armay, the last of the House of Savoy. When I walked into their grand, minimalist entryway, the party was in full swing. The house was filled with Laura's loud, confident friends and Richard's new corporate colleagues. And there, on the main wall, was the tree. It was, I had to admit, a magnificent work of art. A sprawling, beautifully drawn tree, its branches filled with the elegant calligraphed names of the Dubois and Scott families, stretching back for centuries. It was a monument to their own curated importance. And just as they had promised, my own branch was conspicuously, painfully, absent. Laura, a vision in a blood-red dress, rushed over to me. "Genevieve, you came," she said, her voice full of a relieved, slightly surprised warmth. "Isn't it magnificent?" she asked, gesturing to the tree. "It's a beautiful piece of art, Laura," I said, my voice calm and even. Richard came over and gave me an awkward, one-armed hug. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said. "It means a lot." He looked at the tree, his face full of a proud, self-satisfied glow. He had no idea he was looking at a forgery, a beautiful, expensive, and incomplete lie. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. I accepted a glass of champagne, and I waited. My moment came, as I knew it would, during the toasts. After Richard and Laura had thanked everyone for coming, a man I didn't recognize, one of Laura's colleagues perhaps, raised his glass. "To the Dubois Scott family," he boomed. "And their incredible roots. It just goes to show, good breeding always tells." A wave of appreciative laughter went through the room. And that was my cue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just turned to the man standing next to me, and I spoke in a clear conversational tone that, in the sudden lull, carried across the room. "It's funny you should mention that," I said. "I've just been doing a bit of my own genealogical research." All eyes turned to me. Richard and Laura froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, a look of sheer, unadulterated panic on their faces. They thought their crazy old mother was about to make a scene, to complain about being left out. I smiled sweetly. My own family tree is much smaller, of course, much cleaner, as Laura would say, but I did discover the most fascinating little story. I turned my gaze to my son. "Richard, dear, you remember all those stories your grandfather used to tell about our family coming from France? Well, it turns out we were looking in the wrong country." I took a small, deliberate sip of my champagne. I had their complete, undivided attention. "It seems my grandmother's family, the Orsinis, didn't come from France at all. They came from Italy, the Piedmont region, to be precise." I saw a flicker of recognition in the eyes of one of Laura's older relatives, a man with a historical society pin on his lapel. "And it turns out," I continued, my voice as calm and steady as a history lecture, "that they weren't farmers. They were, well, They were the Savoyards. My grandmother was Princess Sophia Adelaide Orsini di Savoia. A collective gasp went through the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Richard's face was a mask of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. Laura's perfectly applied lipstick was frozen in a silent, horrified "oh." I wasn't done. And I must thank you both, I said, raising my glass to my son and daughter-in-law. If you hadn't hired that wonderfully meticulous Mr. Abernathy to create your beautiful tree, I never would have known. He was the one who, out of his own academic curiosity, discovered it all. He's a true genius. You should give him a raise. I smiled. And I especially must thank you for being so insistent on keeping my messy branch off your tree. Because, as it turns out, the Swiss bank that holds the dormant royal trust was looking for one single, clean heir. And thanks to your beautiful, edited version of our family, that heir is me. The silence in the room was absolute. The beautiful, expensive, and utterly meaningless family tree on the wall seemed to shrink, to fade into insignificance. All of their manufactured history, all of their desperate, curated importance, had just been rendered completely and utterly irrelevant by a quiet, little old librarian they had tried to erase. The outcome was a quiet, slow, and utterly complete social implosion. The story, of course, got out. The irony was too delicious, too perfect. Richard and Laura, the brand builders, became a laughingstock. Their statement family tree became a monument to their own snobbery and foolishness. They had spent a fortune to prove their own significance, only to discover that they had thrown away the only significant story they ever had. Our relationship, as you can imagine, is different now. They are polite. They call. But the easy, condescending superiority is gone, replaced by a baffled, grudging, and slightly terrified respect. They don't see me as a relic anymore. They see me as a woman with a history they can't comprehend and a fortune they can't touch. And me? I have not changed. I still live in my quiet cottage. I still read my books and tend my garden. But my life is different. I have a new purpose. With the help of a team of very serious Swiss lawyers, I have established the Sophia Foundation in my grandmother's name. We fund scholarships for young historians and genealogists, for people like Mr. Abernathy, people who believe that every branch of every family tree has a story worth telling. The lesson I learned is a beautiful one. Significance is not something you can buy or manufacture. It is not about having your name on a fancy chart. True significance, true legacy, is often hidden in the quiet, messy, and supposedly unimportant branches of our lives. It is found in the stories of the people who came before us, the people we have forgotten, and the people we have chosen to erase. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, those are the branches that bear the most unexpected and magnificent fruit. Thank you for letting me share my story. Please, before you go, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us to continue to unearth these incredible hidden histories. If you have a surprising story in your own family tree, a branch that no one ever talks about, please share it in the comments below. Let's celebrate all of our messy, beautiful, and significant roots. Love you all. This is Grandma Genevieve, and I'll see you in the next story.